Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Family Matters interview series. Thank you for choosing to join the presentation. We're very happy to have you here with us. Just a couple reminders that all lines will be muted throughout tonight's presentation. So if you have any questions, you can enter them into the chat box and someone from the BCAT team will respond to you within 2 to 3 business days. Tonight, we are going to hear from Tiffany Shubert to discuss how are falls influenced by cognitive impairment. Learn best practices to reduce fall risk, including the role of daily exercise and activity. Dr. Schubert is a physical therapist and a researcher who is passionate about providing evidence-based, engaging fall risk management strategies to older adults. She has over 40 publications in peer-reviewed journals and had created and researched several fall prevention programs. Dr. Schubert has a BA from UC San Diego, a master's in physical therapy from UC San Francisco, and a PhD in movement science from UNC Chapel Hill. Joining Tiffany is Lynn Young, the Vice President of Operations at Mansbach Health Tools. Without further ado, let's get started.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Family Matters. We are excited today to be joined by Tiffany Shubert, Senior Product Manager at Relias and founder and managing partner at Shubert Consulting. Tiffany, welcome.
Hey, Lynn, it's so nice to meet you, and I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. We're glad to have you. Before we jump into our topic today, can you share a little bit about yourself with our families? Tell them a little bit about your clinical background. I know you've done some research, your current role.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm a physical therapist by training, and I have been a physical therapist since 1997 and have been working in geriatrics really for the majority of my career. And in mid 2000s, I pursued a research degree. I have a PhD, and the focus of my research was actually on healthy aging and injury prevention. So was really lucky enough to do a deep dive into not so much all the risk factors that are related to falls, because we know a lot about that, but really more into some of the different interventions that we can be doing to prevent falls. I've been in that space a really long time, worked with the CDC for a bit, and have worked with a lot of different organizations that are trying to address falls and minimize falls risk. And actually, at this point in time, I am doing education. So I'm helping educate healthcare providers about best practices in not only fall risk management, but healthy aging and best practices in clinical care.
Well, your background in healthy aging will certainly be perfect for our family attendees today, because this is really what they're looking for, is to really keep their loved one aging in place and safe as long as they can. So let's jump into our topic today about falls and fall risk. Tiffany, when considering fall risk in this aging population, I think a lot of times people assume the primary root cause or what's driving the fall could be something like a balance impairment or muscle weakness, or even something in the home environment that might be contributing. I think our families don't always consider or think about the role of cognition as maybe a primary fall factor, something that could be influencing their risk for falls. Can you share a little bit about the relationship between the aging brain and falls?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, cognition is in the top three when we look at our big risk factors that contribute. And a couple of things happen as we get older. One is, in general, our brain just, it slows down a little bit. And this is all normal. This is a normal part of aging. But our ability to take in information from our environment and process and choose the right action to take to keep us on our feet, that whole process slows down. And in addition to that, we also can be much more easily distracted as we get older. And you may find this, you're having a conversation with someone, and in the past there could have been a TV going and you weren't paying it all attention, but now you're like, wait a minute, so that also happens. So we're easily distracted, everything is slowing down a bit. And so as a result, our reaction times are slowed. And so that would be in the typical aging process. And then what ends up happening is if we have any level of disease or dementia or even illness, all of those things can be aggravated and exacerbated quite a bit.
That's a really good point. And you mentioned older adults with dementia. I know that older adults with dementia fall more often and may even experience more falls with injury than those folks that maybe don't have a diagnosis of dementia. Can you provide a little bit of insight as to why that's the case?
Yeah, and there's definitely not one answer, unfortunately, to that particular question. And so we always have to look at each individual person and their environment. But again, going back to choosing the right reactions. So a lot of times what we'll see, we sort of see two types. We see the type of the older adult who's aging with dementia who may be actually very active. And this is the person who might get out of bed very quickly or who wants to walk and may not have the physical ability to walk safely. So they might be walking and walking quickly because that's really what they want to be doing, but then they're not seeing, a gap in the floor, or they're just not processing as quickly, and so they experience more falls because they're just not taking in their environment as quickly as they're moving through it. And then the other side of the spectrum is the folks who are not so active and are not so impulsive. And these are the folks who are really more sitting all day long. They're sitting, they're getting weaker. And again, they're not really having insights into what they can and cannot do. And I always have a hard time with that because I don't ever want to tell anybody they can't do something.
Sure.
But as a result, they've gotten super weak, and that's also contributing to their fall risk.
So when we think about particularly those folks that might be a little bit weaker, and we've talked a little bit about cognition and falls, are there interventions available, for someone that is experiencing a diagnosis of dementia or even just a cognitive impairment? Are there home exercise programs or things they can actively participate in where they might be able to benefit from some exercise to maybe beef up some of that strength and endurance so they can be more successful?
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a lot of research on this, and it's quite compelling with some nuances. So people with dementia can absolutely exercise every day. One of the things that we've learned is that you have to be very prescriptive in what you do with that exercise, which means that it has to be consistent. Like if you decide 9 a.m. is the time, then every day at 9 a.m. is the exercise time. The music is the same, the are the same. So you're basically doing the exact same routine every day at the same time. If you can establish that, it can be incredibly impactful. Couple things are going on. One, the individual with dementia is engaged doing something that hopefully they like to do. So hopefully you're going to use like music that they enjoy and you're going to have fun with it. And then two, they're going to get stronger, which is really important. And that actually we all know that if your legs are strong, you may continue to fall, but if you're stronger, your chance of experiencing an injury is much lower. And it's just better for everyone's well-being. So those are some things to consider. The other thing to note, and I touched upon this earlier, but when you are interacting with someone with dementia, minimizing the distractions can have a huge impact on their ability to engage with you. And so that's another thing just to consider. And I'll do this when I was seeing people full time as a clinician, like going for a walk with someone, we like to talk, and I'm a physical therapist, so I would definitely like to talk. But what I learned through my clinical experience is that if I'm working with someone who has cognitive impairment and I start talking, I'm going to start distracting them. So also being very mindful that if you're in an environment that's very distracting, don't have that other conversation. Like let that person focus on what they are doing. So look at how you can minimize the distractions in the environment and then be very consistent with your exercise, and you'll be in a much better situation.
So it sounds like having this part of your morning or afternoon routine, keeping it the same, maybe having the same music, same time of day, maybe the same caregiver who's helping assist or doing it with you even could be beneficial. And then the focus of that activity is the focus. So this isn't a time for, filling them in on the latest gossip or chatting about the family. Just really focus in on the exercises during this time to get the best benefit.
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
Absolutely.
Makes sense.
And and one other point I would like to bring up is that, we want to do things that we want to do. And so also making sure that if that individual really enjoyed dancing when they were younger, looking at ways that you can creatively integrate a little dance into that whole process. If that person really enjoyed walking, that's totally fine. Let's make sure we are putting a walk into the process. So you just want to always circle it back to what's important to that person.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, you want it to be something that they look forward to, not sort of a chore like, oh no, it's exercise time. Instead, it's, oh, we're going for a walk, which sounds, a lot more enjoyable and more fun than trying to sell somebody on, we're going to work out for 20 minutes or whatever the case may be. So
Exactly. Yes.
it's all in the messaging, right?
Yes, it is always.
And I know a lot of the family members and caregivers who join Family Matters are involved with their loved ones. They participate in a lot of activities, and ultimately their goal is to really just keep their loved ones safe. Do you have any useful strategies or suggestions for families on how to reduce those fall risks? What can they be doing proactively in addition to the exercise to set them up for success?
No, absolutely. And I think the first thing I want to call out is that be realistic with your expectations. And what I really mean is that don't feel like you failed if you do a stuff and still your loved one falls, because this is a really complex, challenging situation. So that's the first thing. Let's just sort of like set the baseline that anything you do is fantastic, but just be realistic. So things that you can consider doing are, first of all, looking at your home environment and not necessarily, doing a full remodel or anything along those lines, but looking at where does my loved one spend their time? What are the activities they like to do? And how can I make sure that those areas are consistent? In other words, they don't change all that much. So sometimes where I've seen people make mistakes is like, oh, my mom is falling and I need to like move all the furniture. But the problem is that mom hasn't actually memorized where all the furniture is in the room. And if you move it and she's expecting to reach out and grab the back of the sofa and it's not there, she might fall. So figuring out, how do I set up the environment that it's not going to change? And how do I minimize the stress there? So that's one thing. Already talked about this, but being super consistent with your daily schedule. That actually has a huge impact on people's ability to not use their cognitive resources to figure out what's going on, but use their cognitive resources to engage and stay on their feet. So that's another thing that you can do. We talked about exercise, and I want to say the other thing about exercise, it's a nice double whammy, is there's been studies that show if a caregiver exercises with the caree, they both benefit significantly. So that's just something to consider. And the final thing is just make sure you're having some fun with all of this.
Yeah, and I'm sure the caregivers need to take good care of themselves because they're playing a really pivotal role in keeping their loved one at home. So we don't, sometimes caregivers are also older adults who could be at risk to fall. So it's an extra benefit if they're also doing the exercises and building themselves up at the same time. I would imagine it's, advantageous not just for the person, the loved one, but also for the caregivers themselves. So that's a really good point too to think
Yeah,
about.
absolutely. Absolutely. And then one other thing just to consider is that the Centers for Disease Control has been working really hard to elevate what you actually do in a falls risk screening across all providers for many years now. It's getting there slowly, but I want to call out a few things. One is making sure vision is on a regular basis. Reason being is that if you start having vision changes and you can't perceive your environment, that can increase your fall risk. Two is actually hearing. And we're really finding that when hearing is impaired, it increases your risk for falls. And there's a lot of reasons around that we won't go into at this moment in time. But I'm calling those two things out because you can do all the right things, but you also want to make sure that any other risk factors that are going on, you're on top of. So something to consider. And the third thing is medications. We know that there's a lot of medications that increase fall risk. So making sure you're having the conversation with your healthcare provider or your pharmacist to make sure that you're not your loved one isn't on a med that could potentially be increasing their risk.
Yeah, that's really good advice to be thinking about, outside of just kind of the physical wellness, but to be thinking about the senses and medications, everything kind of contributes and plays a role.
Yes.
So when we're thinking about overall wellness, which it sounds like what you're talking about here is really just, the overall wellness of older adults. Couple of questions. Can we actually improve their cognition? And how would that impact their overall wellness and their mobility ultimately?
It is a great question. And it's a question that we don't have a perfect answer for as of now. There's a lot of research that has been done in looking at if you participate in cardiovascular activity, anything that gets your heart rate up, aerobic activity, if you do strength training, that these can all have positive benefits on certain aspects of cognition. And just some fun facts. We know that when people participate in strength training interventions, meaning that they literally are either lifting weights or using body weight, it's actually associated with improved memory. And they're still trying to figure all that out. And same thing with folks who participate in regular aerobic exercise. We just see that their executive function, higher order thinking improves. Now, the caveat here is all of those interventions have been done with individuals who are aging without an extra layer of cognitive impairment. What we see in our individuals with cognitive impairment, super early days, is that when they participate in regular physical activity or exercise, that their mood is better, they sleep better, they have less anxiety, less stress. And so as a result, it's not necessarily that their cognition improves if we measured it, but their ability to interact with their environment improves significantly. And that's basically where we're at this moment in time. So we're just really seeing, again, more sort of a positive health benefit to being physically active every day that is resulting in just a better life. But we haven't seen a big change in actual cognitive performance.
There's a lot of ways we can take these small steps to have sort of a big impact on our health. All of these little building blocks kind of add up to big picture items. So it's really important to be thinking about small things like having a schedule and building exercise in can really play a role in your overall wellness as well. So these are really great points. So, Tiffany, I know a lot of our families are taking care of their loved ones in the home setting and are probably looking for community-based activities or programs that they might be able to get connected to reduce these risks for falls and really help stimulate their cognition. Do you have any recommendations or suggestions on how families can access local activities or programs in their own community?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm actually going to start with a national resource and then we'll drill down. So, the National Council on Aging is a fantastic resource for healthy aging, for caregivers. I mean, they sort of cover everything, but they actually have what's called the Falls Free Checkup on their website. And it's a series of 12 questions that you can answer. It's really powerful because it helps you identify if you have specific risk factors, why they're a risk factor, and what to do about it. And I always tell people about this because anybody can do it. Like, I don't, like, as a caregiver, I could take it right now, and I don't need to be a healthcare provider. But the other thing that's nice about it is you can do it once a week, you can do it once a month, you can do it once every 3 months, and it's just a really nice way to just sort of track to see how you're doing. Also on the National Council on Aging's website are a series of evidence-based health promotion programs. And so these are programs that have been researched and validated to be highly effective. Some are specific to falls, some are specific to caregivers, some are specific to physical activity. And the reason why I bring this up is that oftentimes those programs will be available in communities, specifically at senior centers. So one option is to, find some programs on NCOA's website, find your local senior center, give them a call, see if they offer them. Other great programs would also, the Y does great programming, and also Silver Sneakers. So then the thing is, okay, well, where do I start? So I would say first, the really most important thing is if you find a program that you think would be appropriate at your senior center at the Y, go to it and observe first, because you want to make sure that it's the right fit and the folks who are in that program are similar to your loved one. Because sometimes you end up in the
Makes
Zumba
sense.
class, yeah, with the 80-year-olds, and yeah, it's a lot. The other time is the other thing to note is to figure out when is the quietest time, or the least busy time at that particular facility. So if you go to a YMCA between like 11 and 2, 11 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, it's a very different experience than between 6 in the morning and 9 in the morning. So you want to go when it's more quiet, less busy, less distracting. And then just do some homework. Hey, what type of people come to this facility? Do you accommodate folks with cognitive impairment? What does that look like?
Good questions
It,
to ask.
yeah, and just do a little research, because some places are totally perfectly set up, and some places are work in progress with all of that. So, and then the final thing just to note is that there's a lot of great online offerings as well. And in particular, if you use Medicare Advantage and Silver Sneakers, they have done a beautiful job revamping their online offerings throughout the pandemic, and they continue to improve. So there's loads of free exercise classes online that are available, via the computer, which also can really work incredibly well. So lots of good stuff out there.
Yes, particularly for folks who might have issues, transporting their loved one. Maybe they have, they don't always have the help or the assistance to get them in and out of the car. So it's a great idea looking for even home-based options. If you need something just to supplement what you're already doing, it sounds like there's a lot of options out there.
There are, and one last thing I want to call out is that if you are working with a healthcare provider in the home, if for any reason you're working with a home health agency, ask that if you're working with a physical therapist or an OT or an SLP, ask them their recommendations, because if they're in the home and can help set you up with the appropriate online program, that can be a huge win. And then they can actually engage with your loved one as part of the therapeutic experience, to get them set up and using it safely, and determine if that would be an appropriate home exercise program or discharge plan.
That's a great idea as well, just to have them kind of take a spot check of what's out there and say, would this be right for me? Do you think this fits my needs? And even just maybe do the first session or two to kind of get them started, get them rolling a little bit, and that will help make them more successful. These are great ideas. These are really great suggestions. I'm sure our families appreciate all of your knowledge and expertise and input today. It's been a really great hearing all these different things that families can do to be proactive and to kind of take next steps to keep their loved ones safe. So we really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. I really appreciate it.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining. And family members, thanks for taking the time to join. And we will see you on our next Family Matters call. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
All right. Before we wrap up, we would like to take this opportunity to invite you to become a member of the Enrich Brain Health Program by signing up on our Enrich website if you haven't already, which is www.enrichvisits.com. And if you're interested in more information from the BCAT Research Center, you can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Again, if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat box, and a member of the BCAT team will respond to you via email within 2 to 3 business days. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining this episode of the Family Matters series, and we hope to see you again for our next episode in November, entitled, I have noticed some changes in mood and memory in my loved one. How can I spot check those areas of concern so I can decide next steps? I'm going to leave the meeting up just for another minute or so in case anybody has any questions, and I hope everybody has a great night.